People who have snapped on a bully at school, what's your story? Story 1. For context, I'm 6'5" and have been since high school. There was a girl I was friends with who had a boyfriend. There was nothing going on between us, but her boyfriend was older and used to call me names and throw shit at me in the halls. I'm not a particularly confrontational person, so I let it go on like that for a while. There was a day when he knocked my books out of my hand and I had had enough. He wasn't nearly as big as I was, so I picked him up by his shirt and slammed him against the locker. The bullying stopped. Story 2. In 4th grade, this kid named Nick used to punch me every day at recess. I went home one day crying about it, and my dad told me to punch him back. So the next day when Nick came around to punch me, I whipped around and just beat the snot out of him. Absolutely wailed on him. One of the teachers noticed and took us to the principal's office, and we got off with warnings. After that, Nick never punched me again, but would make sure I could get to the front of the line for the drinking fountain and picked me first for any sports game he was team captain for. Story 3. I didn't snap a bully, but I did snap at a teacher who didn't do anything no matter how many times I told her I was being bullied. All my bullies, their parents were on the parent council. They got funding for field trips and things like that, so the kids were basically untouchable. I yelled at all the teacher telling her that they had done to me. Things like taking my school supplies, excluding me from activities, calling me names and throwing things at me, along with other things. I told them how I was sick and tired of being blamed, that it was my fault I had no friends. Every single bully told people to avoid me. They invented this thing called the Katie touch. Like the cheese touch, but you could get the Katie touch if you talked to me. And I finished it by telling her that she was stupid and was too worried about losing school funding that she didn't care what happened to her students. No one backed me up and nothing changed. I got a 3-day in-school suspension, but the bullying got worse. Kids would take my lunch and shoes, so I'd get in trouble for not wearing indoor shoes, and I passed out one time from hunger and dehydration from not eating. I hated that school, and I'm so glad I went to junior high that didn't have anyone else there for my old elementary. And to all teachers, just because a kid is always playing by themselves, it doesn't mean that they like it that way. Also, if a kid tells you they're being bullied, then do something about it. Story 4. I was 7, and I was a nice kid with average grades, and this one bully that was taller than me. He used to be any typical bully, like trip you on your lunch and push your head for no apparent reason. I was getting annoyed that I felt the red heat go all over my body. I looked at him and told him to stop. I looked at him. He pushes me to the ground. I stopped and kicked his tables and punched his nose with all my force. His nose started to bleed and I was sent to the office. My mom had this thing where if they started it, then she'll pretend that she's mad at me at school and come home saying congrats. Story 5. 6th grade. A few days before the end of school year, beat his ass and didn't stop even with teachers saying so. The bully stopped, but I was sick and tired of his shit. Lucky me, I didn't have to come in for those remaining 3 days. Best of all was that my parents were on my side. Story 6. 5th grade, this dude who always picked on me was kicking my seat in assembly, and I was having a terrible week, and this was my last straw. I turned, punched him in the face, but I wasn't satisfied with the first punch because it felt weak, so I figured I'm already going to be in trouble. So I went back for a second, better punch that felt worth getting in trouble over. Also, this was a DARE assembly, which was about saying no to drugs and violence, so I basically learned nothing. Story 7. My second and friends, like 15 years old, bully decided to sit next to me in class. Repeatedly whispered insults to me, and at one point I snapped, took his head and bashed it into the desk. I think I would have been in deep shit had his textbook not been there. Needless to say, I got kicked out of that class and had to change English group. Story 8. I was being bullied for like a month when I was 13 and 14. Some guy from my class started messing with me, pushing, hair grabbing, neck slapping, stuff like that, and I didn't know how to handle it. One of his friends from another class, a guy I had never spoken to before, tried it once and I instinctively punched him in the face. Bullying stopped. If that random guy didn't do what he did, I don't know how I would have put an end to it, to be honest. Story 9. I was severely bullied from my earliest memory all the way through high school. The times I remember snapping were these. 3rd grade. We were putting the chairs upside down onto the desk at the end of the day, and this kid kept pushing my chair and pushing me. I turned around and shoved him as hard as I could with both hands, and he fell onto the desk behind him. The chair fell off. He fell off onto the chair, and I got in trouble. 4th grade. At some Boy Scout thing, there were sodas. I got one out of the cooler, and a kid who bullied me a lot grabbed it out of my hand and walked away. I grabbed another one and threw it at the back of his head. Got in trouble, of course. 7th or 8th grade. After being bullied incessantly, I lost it and was crying and screaming and punching the lockers and got in trouble for denting a couple of them. 9th or 10th grade. While on the bus, one of the bullies grabbed my comb out of my back pocket. He messed with me a lot. Rather than punching, for some reason I used my open hand to slap him really hard on top of his head. He was seated and I was standing in the aisle. He complained of his neck hurting from it and I got in trouble. Between each of these instances, I'd put up with constant bullying every day and do nothing, and no teachers gave a shit. Bullies got away with bullying me all the time. But even if I simply said, "Leave me alone," with a loud voice, I was in trouble. It never made any sense to me. Story 10. I had been bullied all year long by this guy, and it was the last week of 8th or 9th grade. Comes up to me and says something about my clothes or something, and I just saw red. I turned around and I hit him with a palm strike to the face. The bottom of my hand connected right under his nose. He doubled over and I bolted. I heard later his lip got stuck in his braces and he had to go to the doctor to fix it. I got a stern talking to about not hitting people, although my teachers were aware of the verbal bullying. Story 11. High school. One girl made my life hell. I didn't even know her or fully understand why she targeted me. She tried to run me over and told cops I walked in front of her car. One day, walking up the stairs, she proceeded to taunt me, hitting me in the back with objects and calling me names. I stopped, turned around, and punched her in the nose. She landed on her back on the landing. I just stood over her and said, "What now, bitch?" She never said one word to me after that. Story 12. Couple of bullies liked to do monkey in the middle with me. Didn't take long to figure out the solution was to simply tackle one of the bullies and start punching. Story 13. In middle school, we were hanging around before class started, and this guy who used to be my friend came up behind me and put a condom in my mouth. I turned around, pushed him up against the wall, and punched him in the face. The whole school heard about it, and they were all backing me up for the rest of the day. I didn't even get in trouble. Edit, because I'm getting some upvotes, I'll expand a bit. He was super embarrassed and tried to negotiate with me, saying, "You have to let me punch you back to make up for it," or save his honor or some shit. People would not stop teasing him about it. I think that's when the teachers heard about it. They thought it was funny, and I had a good rep with them, so they let it slide.